Don't forget to like the video, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to stay updated with our latest stories. I was folding laundry when the knock came. Not the kind of knock you expect, firm and deliberate, like someone who knew exactly what they were doing, like they'd been standing outside for a moment already, working up the courage to make their presence known. It was late afternoon, and the golden sunlight streamed in through the curtains, casting that soft, haunted glow over the furniture, the kind that makes everything look just a little more nostalgic than it ought to. My hands paused over a pair of neatly folded socks, and I listened. Another knock. 3 solid raps. I wasn't expecting anyone. My grown daughter had called that morning just to check in. No packages were due. No friends had mentioned stopping by. When I opened the door, there stood a man I didn't immediately recognize. Tall, mid-50s perhaps, with dark eyes that held a gentle warmth, and a touch of silver at his temples that softened what might have otherwise been a stern face. "Hi," he said with a small smile. "You must be Helen. I'm Grant, Ben's friend. Ben, my boss. Or, well, former boss now, since I just retired 2 weeks ago." I blinked in surprise, searching my memory. I remembered Ben mentioning a friend named Grant a few times over lunch, back when we still had those quick chats in the break room. Grant from college, he used to say, with a fondness in his voice. But we'd never met. "Yes, I'm Helen," I replied, stepping back slightly. "Would you like to come in?" He hesitated only for a moment before nodding. "Thanks. I hope this isn't a bad time." "Not at all," I said, closing the door behind him as he stepped into the modest warmth of my home. He explained that Ben had told him about my retirement and suggested that, since Grant was now consulting part-time and often in the area, you should stop by and say hello. "Said you were someone worth knowing," he added with a light laugh. "Ben doesn't say that about many people." I offered him tea, which he accepted, and we moved into the kitchen. He watched as I poured the hot water over the bags, his eyes glancing occasionally around the room. Not judging, just observing. "You've made it cozy in here," he said. "Thank you. It's not much, but it's home." We settled at the small table near the window, and conversation came easily, like we were 2 people who'd been circling each other in some way without knowing it. He asked about my work, 32 years in HR, helping people navigate the complications of employment, and often life. I asked about his consulting, mostly strategic work, helping nonprofits stay afloat. There was a comfort in his presence, not because he was particularly charming or polished, but because he listened. Not the way some men do, nodding while their eyes scanned the room for the next thing to conquer, but truly listened. His questions didn't feel like small talk. They felt like little doors, opening one at a time. I found myself talking more than I usually did, telling him about my daughter, who lived 2 states away now, and about the plans I had for my garden this spring. I even told him how quiet the house had felt since retiring. I hadn't expected that part. I thought I'd relish the silence, but it crept into corners I wasn't ready for. He nodded thoughtfully. Sometimes when we stop moving, we realize how much noise we were using to fill the gaps. That line stayed with me. The visit stretched into the early evening. I hadn't meant for it to, but neither of us seemed eager to move it along. When he finally stood to leave, there was an unspoken something between us. Not tension exactly, but an awareness, as if we both felt a connection neither of us had planned for. "I'd like to see you again if you'd be open to that," he said at the door, his voice lower now, almost unsure. I surprised myself with the warmth in my own response. "I'd like that too." He smiled, and then he was gone, leaving the faint scent of cologne and the echo of new possibilities in the air. The next morning, I found myself lingering at the kitchen window, looking out at the sidewalk where he'd stood. I didn't usually check my phone much before breakfast, but I'd left it on the table overnight. Sure enough, there was a message. Ben must have given him my number. Had a lovely time yesterday. Hope I didn't overstay. Would love to bring lunch sometime, if that's okay. Grant. I smiled and typed back. You didn't overstay. Lunch sounds perfect. 2 days later, he came back, this time with sandwiches and lemon bars, and that same quiet steadiness that felt more grounding than I expected. We ate in the backyard, under the shade of the old elm tree that had watched over my house for years. He asked me what it had been like to be a woman in corporate life for so long, and I told him stories, some funny, some hard. You're strong, he said simply. I had to be. He didn't argue with that. He just nodded, letting the words settle. We were both quiet for a while after that, watching a pair of bluebirds flit through the branches above. You know, I said slowly, I hadn't realized how much of myself I'd put away over the years. I think I forgot what it felt like to just be. He reached across the table and gently laid his hand over mine. Maybe now's the time to remember. Something about the way he said it unlocked a quiet part of me I hadn't touched in a long time. After he left that afternoon, I didn't go back inside right away. I sat under the elm and closed my eyes, feeling the warmth of the day on my skin and the echo of his words in my chest. Maybe now's the time to remember. And maybe, just maybe, a knock from my boss's friend was the beginning of something I didn't know I'd been waiting for. The following week, Grant and I met again, this time at a local art gallery, a place I hadn't visited since my daughter was in high school. I'd forgotten how colors could stir emotion, how a single brushstroke could feel like it mirrored a thought you'd never spoken aloud. We stood in front of a painting of 2 figures sitting in silence on a porch, facing a long stretch of field. The moment felt oddly familiar. It's not always the loudest moments that stay with us, he said softly, standing beside me. Sometimes it's the quietest ones, I replied. He looked at me then, not just a glance, but with intention. I felt it like a pull beneath my ribs, warm and patient. There was nothing rushed, nothing forced, just presence. We walked through the gallery slowly, and he told me about his late wife, how she'd loved to paint, how he hadn't stepped into a gallery since she passed 3 years ago. I almost didn't come today, he admitted. I'm glad you did, I said. So am I. Afterward, we sat in the cafe next door. The conversation turned to things less polished, regrets, hopes, the unexpected ways life bends. I told him how I used to dream of moving to the coast, starting over near the water, but somewhere along the way, that dream turned into something quieter. Maybe it doesn't have to stay a dream, he said. Maybe not, I answered, but there was a wistfulness in my voice I couldn't hide. He reached across again, not to hold my hand this time, but to tuck a stray hair behind my ear. A small gesture, but it landed gently, deliberately, in the quiet between us. That evening, after he'd gone home, I stood in front of the mirror brushing my hair, and for the first time in a long while, I saw a version of myself I'd missed. A woman with depth behind her eyes, and the beginning of something tender just beneath her skin. Something had shifted. And neither of us, I think, wanted to look away. Asked ChatGPT. The following weekend, Grant invited me to his place for dinner. I hesitated at first, not because I didn't want to go, but because something about crossing that threshold felt like stepping further into a space I wasn't sure I was ready for. Yet, as I stood in front of the mirror adjusting the collar of my soft cream blouse, I realized part of me had already stepped through. And not just part of me. the part that had been waiting quietly in the wings for years, watching life go by instead of participating in it. His house was a short drive from mine, nestled at the edge of town on a street lined with old oaks and well-worn sidewalks. When I pulled up, he was already at the door, waving me in like I was someone he'd been waiting on all day. "Come in," he said with that gentle warmth that always made me feel a little more sure of myself. "I hope you're hungry." The aroma that greeted me as I stepped inside was rich and comforting, something with garlic and rosemary, mingling with the faint scent of something sweet baking in the oven. The place had a lived-in feel. Books stacked on side tables, a few framed sketches on the walls, and a deep green armchair near the fireplace that looked like it had stories of its own. "Make yourself at home," he said, handing me a glass of wine. "Dinner will be ready in about 15 minutes. I figured we could sit out back until then." His backyard was small but charming, strung with soft lights that glowed like little stars above our heads. The sky was deepening into that indigo shade that makes you want to pause and exhale. I took a sip of the wine. It was light, fruity, and easy. "You've made this place feel like a haven," I said, settling into the wooden chair beside him. He smiled. That was the idea. After Lisa passed, I needed to start over in small ways. This house helped, gave me something to care for. I looked at him, the lines around his eyes a little softer in the twilight. "You talk about her with love. That's rare." "She was a good woman," he said. "And I think we honor people by carrying their goodness forward, not by staying frozen where they left us." I nodded slowly, letting the quiet settle between us like a warm blanket. He didn't try to fill it with noise. Instead, he looked out across the yard as if remembering something that made him ache and smile at the same time. When dinner was ready, he led me inside and served roasted chicken with wild rice and glazed carrots. Everything was cooked perfectly, simple, but with care. We talked about music and the awkwardness of dating in your 60s, and how strange it is that no one ever really prepares you for the loneliness that sometimes comes, not all at once, but in small, persistent moments. "I used to think loneliness meant being alone," I said, cutting a carrot in half. "But sometimes you can feel lonely sitting right next to someone who doesn't really see you." He looked up, eyes meeting mine across the table. "But I see you, Helen." It wasn't flirtation. It wasn't said with pressure or expectation. It was quiet and steady, like a promise spoken aloud for the first time. After dessert, lemon cake, just slightly warm, he walked me to my car. The air was cooler now, the kind that makes you wish you'd brought a scarf. Before I opened the door, he paused. "May I ask something?" he said, hands in his pockets. "Of course. This thing, whatever it is we're walking into, are you okay with it?" "I don't want to, Miss Steph. I'm not in a hurry. But I don't want to pretend there's nothing here either." I swallowed, surprised by how steady my voice was when I replied. "I'm okay with it. And I don't want to pretend either." He smiled, that kind of smile that starts slowly and ends in the eyes. "Then let's keep walking, one step at a time." As I drove home, the night felt different. Not just because of what had been said, but because of how it had been said. There was no rush, no urgency, no trying to impress or win me over. Just sincerity and the space to breathe. Over the next few weeks, Grant and I saw more of each other. Grocery runs, quiet afternoons at the park, evenings watching old black and white movies on his couch, with a blanket between us and the sound of rain tapping at the windows. We never made any grand declarations, but everything we did felt intentional. One Sunday, he brought over an old record player he'd repaired. "Figured your living room could use a little vinyl soul," he said, setting it on the side table near my window. As the needle dropped, The crackling notes of Nina Simone filled the room. I hadn't realized how much I'd missed the richness of sound, the way vinyl can make a room feel like it's been dipped in nostalgia. We danced slowly that afternoon, just the two of us, the world outside forgotten. My head rested against his shoulder, and his hand pressed gently at the small of my back. It wasn't about romance, not entirely. It was about being known, about letting yourself be held without fear. That night, after he left, I sat alone for a long time, listening to the quiet hum of the house, my hand resting on the back of the chair where he'd sat. I thought of all the years I'd spent tending to others, my daughter, my coworkers, even strangers who'd passed through my life, needing something I was too willing to give. But this, what was forming between Grant and me, this was different. It wasn't about need. It was about choice. I was choosing to open the door again, choosing to let someone see me, not as a role I played, but as the woman I was becoming. And I was starting to believe that maybe, just maybe, it wasn't too late to love again. Not the way I had in the past, but something gentler, truer, something that met me exactly where I was. 2 months had passed since that first knock. I never thought something so small could shift the rhythm of my life. But here I was waking up each morning with a quiet flutter of anticipation, wondering what the day might bring, what moment Grant and I might share, even if it was something as simple as a walk down to the corner bakery or an unexpected conversation over coffee. I'd started writing again. Nothing ambitious, just short reflections in a notebook I kept near the kitchen table. Little thoughts that came to me, how his laugh made me feel like the younger version of myself hadn't really gone anywhere, or how he always remembered to open the car door, not out of habit, but because he wanted to. These weren't things I told him. They were things I told myself, trying to document the unfolding. Then one afternoon my daughter Emily called. "So," she began, "who's the gentleman I saw on your Facebook post?" I laughed, caught off guard. "What post?" "That photo you shared of the 2 coffee mugs on the table. One of them had a book next to it, and a man's hand holding the cup." I hadn't even realized I'd posted something so telling. "That's Grant. He's become a friend." There was a pause on her end. "He seems nice. Are you happy, Mom?" I looked around at the soft light coming in through the window, the record player still humming faintly from earlier that morning, and the small bouquet of wildflowers Grant had left by the sink. "I think I am," I said. "I think I'm finally letting myself be." That weekend, Grant invited me to join him on a small day trip to the lake. It wasn't far, maybe an hour's drive, but the idea of getting away for a bit thrilled me in a way I hadn't expected. We packed sandwiches, a thermos of coffee, and an old checkered blanket he kept in the trunk of his car. The drive was peaceful. We didn't talk much. We didn't need to. He drove with one hand on the wheel, the other occasionally brushing mine between gear shifts. There was music playing, some old Simon and Garfunkel song, and the air smelled faintly of pine as we rolled the windows down. When we reached the lake, we found a quiet spot near the far end, away from the scattered picnic tables and families playing catch. The water shimmered under the sun, and the trees swayed gently in the breeze, like they were whispering secrets only they understood. We laid out the blanket, sat close, and shared our lunch. Afterward, we lay back in the grass, watching the sky drift slowly above us. "Do you ever think about starting over completely?" I asked, my voice softer than I'd intended. He turned his head toward me. "I used to. After Lisa passed, I wanted to sell everything and disappear into the woods somewhere. But then I realized, maybe starting over doesn't mean changing your whole life. Maybe it just means allowing something new to grow where you are." I let that sit with me. It made sense. My life wasn't dramatically different, Same house, same routines, but I felt different inside. More awake, more willing. Later that afternoon, we walked along the lake's edge. I slipped off my shoes, letting the cold water run over my feet. Grant watched me with that familiar half-smile he always wore when he was both amused and moved. "You look free," he said. "Maybe I am." On the way home, the clouds began to gather. By the time we reached town, a gentle rain had started to fall. He pulled into my driveway and cut the engine, neither of us moving right away. "I could make tea," I offered. "If you're not in a rush." "I'm never in a rush with you." Inside, I lit a few candles, partly because the storm made the house darker, but also because I liked the glow. It softened the edges of everything. Grant stood in the middle of the kitchen, watching me with that quiet presence he always carried. "You make this place feel like a memory," he said. I looked at him, curious. "A memory?" He nodded. "You know, those moments that feel like they'll stay with you, even before they're over." His words lingered as I poured the tea. We sat in the living room, the rain tapping on the windows, the scent of lemon and chamomile rising between us. And then, without pretense, without ceremony, he reached out and took my hand. Just held it. His thumb brushed slowly across my knuckles, and I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Complete ease. We didn't kiss. We didn't need to. There was something far more intimate happening in that silence. A kind of understanding. The storm rolled on outside, but inside, we stayed still. Safe. Known. That night, after he left, I stood in the doorway for a long time, watching the rain pour down on the street. I thought of the knock that started it all, how unexpected it had been, and how everything since had grown from that one moment. I went to bed with my heart full, not of wild passion or dramatic declarations, but of something far more enduring. Trust, comfort, quiet joy. And in that space, I realized I wasn't just letting someone in. I was finally letting myself out. Autumn arrived gently that year. The air turned crisp, and the maple in my front yard blushed a brilliant red, leaves spiraling down like soft reminders that everything changes, even us. I found myself watching the seasons more closely than I used to. Maybe it was Grant. Maybe it was the quiet way he'd helped me slow down, or maybe I was finally starting to notice the beauty in stillness. We'd settled into a rhythm, the kind you don't plan for but fall into naturally. He kept a sweater at my place, and I kept a box of his favorite herbal tea in my cupboard. Sometimes he'd leave me little notes on my kitchen counter, small things, scribbled on scraps of paper. "Hope your roses bloomed today. You looked peaceful last night." Once he left one that simply said, "You are not forgotten." That one stayed tucked in my wallet. One afternoon, he surprised me with tickets to a concert at the local university, a small jazz quartet playing in an old auditorium. I hadn't been to anything like that in years. I dressed a little nicer than usual, even put on lipstick, and when I opened the door, his eyes widened just a little. "You look wonderful," he said. It was the pause that got me. That tiny breath he took before he spoke, like he meant it so much he had to slow it down. The music that night stirred something in me. The kind of music that doesn't just fill the room, but seems to hum in your bones. I reached for his hand during a slow piece, and he didn't flinch. He simply held on tighter. As we walked back to the car under a canopy of golden leaves, he stopped suddenly and turned to me. "I've been thinking about something," he said. I'd looked up at him, the streetlight casting soft shadows across his face. "What's that?" "I don't want to keep this casual anymore. I want to be part of your life, not just around the edges, not just in the quiet moments, but really in it. With you. The words caught me, not because they were unexpected, but because they arrived so openly. No rush, no pressure, just truth. I took a breath and smiled. I want that too. I think I've wanted it for a while. He leaned in and kissed my forehead, gentle, warm, and lingering. And we stood there, two people in the autumn chill, choosing something together. That weekend, we drove out to the coast. It was something I had always wanted to do, see the ocean again, but through different eyes. We stayed in a small inn on a cliffside, the kind with creaky floors and mismatched curtains, where every room smelled faintly of salt and sunlight. On our second morning, we woke early and watched the sun rise over the water. I sat wrapped in a blanket, sipping coffee as the waves rolled in slow and steady. I used to imagine moments like this, I said quietly, but I never thought they'd find me. Grant didn't say anything. He just slipped his arm around my shoulders and pulled me close. His warmth, the hush of the ocean, and the steady beat of his heart near mine. It felt like a kind of arrival. Later that afternoon, we walked barefoot along the beach. The sky was streaked with soft blues and grays, and the wind lifted my hair in gentle waves. We didn't talk much. We didn't have to. Everything that needed to be said was already in the way we walked, side by side, close enough to brush arms but never pulling. Back at the inn, as we packed to leave, he turned to me and said, "Helen, when I met you, I didn't know I was still capable of something like this." I looked up from folding my sweater. Something like what? "Hope," he said. "Peace. Wanting something again. Not out of loneliness, but because it feels right." I felt my eyes sting with tears. Not the kind born from sadness, but from being seen. Fully. Without armor, without performance. When we got home, the days settled into a new kind of ordinary. We spent holidays together, quiet ones, where family joined or didn't, but where the connection between us stayed steady. We read in the evenings, cooked together, argued sometimes about music or the right way to organize the pantry. It was real, unfiltered. Ours. One winter night, we sat by the fire, our feet tucked under the same blanket, the room glowing with soft amber light. I leaned my head on his shoulder and whispered, "Do you ever think about what would have happened if you hadn't knocked on my door that day?" "All the time," he said. "But I try not to live in the what-ifs. I'm just grateful for the what is." I closed my eyes, listening to the sound of the fire crackling, the clock ticking softly behind us. I thought about how love didn't always have to start with fireworks. Sometimes it begins with a knock. A quiet, deliberate knock that changes everything. And as the night deepened, I held on to the truth I had found in his presence. That love, at any age, is not about reclaiming youth. It's about honoring where you've been and choosing, gently but bravely, to keep your heart open anyway. Because sometimes the best chapters come after you think the story is already done. And all it takes to begin is someone willing to knock.